Welcome to Alpha Web and Web for All, moving your organization toward accessibility compliance. My name is Gretchen Grant, and I will be your host today. I am a senior web developer at the Institute's Risk and Insurance Knowledge Group. We just call it the Institutes because that's kind of a mouthful. So today what we're going to be talking about is web accessibility, and I am so excited that you guys have decided to start your day with me. I'm just tickled because this is a subject that is very important to me, but I can only do so much. I need all of you as my allies to move the pie forward and make the web a better place for all of us. And that's what we're here to learn about today. So I'm going to start with what we're going to cover today and move into how I got into all of this, and then we'll get rolling. If I can figure out how to advance the slide. Yay! So these are the questions that we're going to answer today. Why should we invest in accessibility? What is the point? Why should we even bother? Quick show of hands. In the room, who here has accessibility concerns as a part of their day-to-day, every day? This is something I always do. Great. Who is seeing it looming on the horizon and knows that this is something that we need to get better at as an organization? Who knows that, who is one of those, why do we need to invest in accessibility at all? This is stupid, I should just be getting on with real important stuff. Or who works for that guy? This is going to give you a few things that you can go back to those people and say, this is why we have to do this. This is why this is important. I know you want the bells and whistles, but in order to get there in a way that's going to be beneficial for everyone, we need to do this too. So this is going to give you some of those tools. We're also going to answer the question, how do we meet AA compliance standards and what that means and who sets it and all that sort of fun stuff. And I will have for everyone this cool checklist handout, which will also be available online, that can help you walk through your stuff when you think you're done and keep you focused on accessibility, because one of the biggest things is making sure you're keeping it top of mind. So why me? I am a recovering English major. I am a web developer. I lead a team of front-end focused web developers who support about a dozen to 20 Drupal sites for our organization. You'll notice that nothing in my title or in my certifications or in my background says that I have been certified in accessibility technologies. I do not currently use any assistive technologies on a daily basis to access the web. I am just me. So why me? And that's part of the light of this, is that you do not need to be part of a particular demographic group. You do not need to be have your particular title or a particular job duty. Everyone in the organization that touches the site can have a voice in the accessibility part of it, from the designers who are designing things to be more accessible, from the content editors who are putting in content, developers who can pull the brake cord and say, hey, we can't do this, this is not going to work, and all the way through to stakeholders who want to have the best product possible. So everybody has a role in this. Everybody should have a voice in this. How I got involved in this is I was new at the Institutes, and there was a code review, and we had just implemented our mobile nav on this new feature, and it was shiny, and it was sleek, and it was modern, and it slid in like that and slid out. It looked so great. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do a really good job on this code review. I'm going to see if it works in keyboard navigation. And I got the menu to slide out, and then I couldn't get it to go away. And the menu was your friend forever. And I was like, it's a problem. And I thought, wait, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe people who use keyboard navigation don't actually have tablets. They'll never see this menu. It'll be fine. Turns out people who use assistive technologies are just like you and me. They have phones, they have tablets. So I raised my hand in the next planning meeting and said, we got a problem here. This doesn't work for keyboard navigation. And my team lead sighed, looked at the ceiling, and said, okay, you have one sprint, and you can try and solve this problem. And so I took that sprint and I did a deep dive, and I borrowed the iPad from QA, and I turned Voiceover on, which is the iOS accessibility screen reader, which comes standard on every iOS device. And I made Google do that really great thing that it does that's kind of creepy. I did, how do I? And it said, turn Voiceover off. Like, how did you even know I was using Voiceover? But yeah, that's my first big takeaway, that I want you to go try out assistive technologies like screen readers, but before you turn it on, write down how to turn it off. Because otherwise you will be trying to turn it off using this interface that you are not familiar with. And it's hard. So know that. That's an important thing to know. So I learned all about all of this stuff. I wrote a wiki article for our wiki, and sort of unwittingly kind of backed into being the accessibility expert in our little area of the world. So that's how I ended up here. And fair disclosure, all of you who are my colleagues who are in this room, this is mostly going to be kind of a rerun, so no judgment if you want to bail and go do something else, because most of the jokes are the same. But anyway, I'm really glad that you're all here. This is why I'm doing this. The more people that know about these issues, that can keep them in the top of mind, the better the web product that we will all build, and the better it is for everyone. So why should you invest in accessibility? Liam Neeson knows. He will find you. They will find you. They will sue you. They will win. You do not want this. If you had somebody who had started a business and they had a busticated sidewalk out front, and you said, aren't you going to fix your sidewalk? And they're like, no, I have a savings account marked slip and fall and lawyers, and I'm just going to pay it with that. I'm not going to spend the money to fix it. I'll just wait until we get sued. You would think that that was crazy, because it is crazy. And it is also crazy to keep a part of your budget for settlements, because eventually somebody is going to have a problem with your site and say, I can't get to what I need to get to. I can't do what I need to do. So why do this? Why not just fix it as part of your development and move on from there? Just like people who use assistive technologies, or just like you and me and have mobile and tablet and all that, they also have wallets. And they want to buy goods and services. So why walk away from people who are eager to give you their cash or consume your information? Whatever it is that your mission is, there are people who want to help that and be part of that. Don't walk away from them. In 2015, 40 million Americans were living with disability issues as per the U.S. Census Bureau. That is the number of people that live in the state of California and the state of Montana. If you were going to do a nationwide product launch and said, I want to sell to everybody in America except Californians and people from Montana because cowboys, that would be an insane business plan. You would have to come up with some really good reasons why you were going to do that. And there's just no logical reason to walk away from that market. And customers can be persuasive. Recently in our own organization, we had a customer come to us and say, we would like to buy your stuff. Here is a dump truck full of cash. But in your web experience needs to be AA compliant. And if our auditors find that it is not, and you cannot fix it in 5 days, then we are going to take our dump truck full of cash and go home. So it may be something that you are not thinking about now, but sales may be thinking about it. And you know what happens when sales guys get out of hand. They sell things that you haven't built yet. And eventually it's going to come back to your desk where you're going to be like, oh, now we have to support this because you said we already did. Thanks. So we want to make sure that we short-circuit that conversation. So who are all these people, these 40 million people that we're talking about? It really spans the gamut. Which does make it easier and harder to accommodate, because you're accommodating a wide array of different ways that people access the web. This is a screenshot of just a few technologies that people use. You may not ever encounter any of them, and that's fine. You can still make sure that when people do use tools like that, that they are getting the best web experience that they can. There are people with visual issues that will need to use eye tracking, or mobility issues that means that they need to use eye tracking devices in order to access things on the web, or even mouse joysticks. I like to be guided by the children's song, Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes. I hope everyone is aware of this one. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. I won't make you sing it, I promise. If you can understand the ways that you're accommodating people by thinking about how you interact with the world. First of all, head, shoulders, knees, and toes is driven by your hands. Your hands are your access to the web. The hands is what we use to move the mouse around. There are people who have mobility issues. Now, those mobility issues can be chronic and serious. That means that you use a whole different way to access the web instead of a mouse. They can also be, I'm going to use keyboard navigation because I'm at my mother's house and she's left-handed and the mouse is just in the wrong place. Or my friend Diane, who broke her wrist and ended up in a cast for 6 weeks and couldn't use a mouse. We go in and out of this space where we need assistive technologies. Head, think about processing details. When you are creating a web page that is a wall of text, it's intimidating for everybody. It's bad user experience, but it's especially difficult for those who have processing difficulties. So chunk that text up, put headings in it, bullet points, all those things that you're doing for good UX are also helping those people who have processing difficulties. Eyes, visuals. Make sure that your contrast is enough so that things really pop. Most of the time, it's not going to be a big deal, but when you have visual issues, it can be a door in your face. Be aware also of color blindness and the difference in saturation values that stands in your way there. My cousin Kevin is colorblind. Didn't bother him at all that he made red trees and green fire trucks, up until the point where he needed to be an EMT. And then it turned out that it was a very important thing to know whether that wound was green or red. There are these things that are not a problem until they are. So those are things we want to be aware of. About ears, auditory. The web is often a visual medium, so we don't have to worry too much about the oral side of things. But it does hit when you are dealing with video. So when you're dealing with video, you're going to have to put into your production schedule time to create a transcript, time to create captions that actually make sense, time to create captions that are descriptive captions so that you get all of the content that you're supposed to be getting out of that. Now, mouth and nose you don't have to worry too much about until smell-o-vision is reliable and ubiquitous, so that's good. Basically, all of these accommodations that we're talking about, all of these ways that we're seeking to meet people where they are, help everyone. They help people. It's just like in the real world where you have a ramp into a place, and that is very helpful and essential for someone who's in a wheelchair. It's also super helpful for the mom who's pushing a stroller, or for the UPS guy who has a dolly full of packages. All of those people benefit from that single thing. And you will find that when you include accessibility accommodations into your code, that will also help everyone. That helps not just people who are using screen readers, it also helps people who are keyboard navigating because they are fixated on efficiency. It helps people who are looking, it helps Google. You're going to get a search bump if One of the major things that you need to comply with is that the content of your page can be determined programmatically. So a screen reader can come to your page and say, this is what this is about, and get the whole gist of everything that they're supposed to get. Guess who else does that? Google search engines. Indexing robots need to programmatically determine the content of your page. So it really makes no sense not to do that. It's the moral high ground. Enjoy it. You're doing the right thing. So it's financially smart. It's morally right. Benefits everyone. And now you know all of the good reasons why we need to bother being in this classroom today to even talk about this. And you all deserve a high five from the king. So how do we get there? And what is AA compliance? So AA compliance is what our organization is headed for. There are levels of compliance. They are set by the W3C as interpreting Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Those two laws are the reason why people can sue you. So we use the W3C's interpretation of what those laws mean in order to guide us in what we have to do. There is an A-level compliance, which is basically your web page does not terrible. It is okay, and it's mostly fine. Things work. There are not JavaScript errors or terrible things happening. AA compliance is the next level up there. That's going to take a little bit more work. There are things that you don't necessarily think of as part of your job as just doing good code that you will need to do. AAA compliance is a high bar. Typically, the only people who do AAA compliance are the people who are legally required to do so. Those usually are like federal government kind of things. Or ally sites sometimes will hit 3. So the basic action plan that you're going to need that you will need for your organization is you need to understand assistive technology, which I hope that by the time you leave here you will have a better understanding of what it is, how it works, and what it does. What to look for in your own sites that may be trubs. How to check for compliance. So these are sources. These are the things that I will leave this up for a couple minutes to get so you can get a good look at it. These are the major sources that I hit all the time. They are good rundowns of what the requirements are. The contrast checker up at WebAIM is absolutely terrific. I'm on it every day. It has a little thing where you put in one color and another color and see if they work together, and it gives you a nice little number that says this is exactly how much contrast you have, so that you can go back to your designer friend and say, I love these colors too, but gosh, it just doesn't pass because it's only 2.87. Sorry, can you fix it? And that way you're not going after the designer for using dumb colors because they're dumb. You're saying that these just don't work because math, and that's awesome. The QR code over here is the checklist. It is a Google Doc. You will get one when you leave here. Feel free to grab it and use it in your own organization. So the guiding principles of how to get to accessibility compliance is be predictable, give the user control, and provide alternatives. What do we mean by be predictable? When we say be predictable, we're talking about when we come to a website, we bring with us all the baggage of all the other websites we've ever come to before. So when we click on something, we have a certain thing that we expect to happen. When you have like a triangle here, I expect if I click on the triangle, it's going to turn like upside over to the down, and things will drop down and I'll get more information. If I have a triangle and I click on it and it doesn't do anything, your site is broken. So that is the assumptions that we bring with us. So what we want to make sure we're doing is using those good UX practices and following through and being predictable about what happens on the page when I interact with it. Similarly, like when you're tabbing through a form, if your form for your billing address is different from everybody else's, and you make them put the zip code in before the city, oh, you've never had fun until you've put in your city where the zip code belongs. You get errors galore. It's great. And you get very confused because you're like, well, I did it right. What is going on? And that is the sort of predictability that we need. We need to check that tab order to make sure that that makes sense to everybody. Giving the user control. Giving the user control is things like, especially for video, we want to make sure that we are not auto-playing videos or removing the ability to mute videos. That, again, is one of those things that benefits everyone. It benefits people who can't handle hearing the audio part. It also benefits those of us who forgot our headphones and are sitting at our cube and still want to watch your video. So make sure that the user has control over the volume and whether it plays or stops, how fast it goes, can I expand the screen or not. All of those things that are in your face that, no, I know best, I'm the website, I know what you want to consume, those are things we want to avoid. The other thing to remember about that is that it's also good UX best practice. What does that? What gets in your face and says, no, I know what's best, I'm just going to play ads. You know what people are really good at ignoring? Ads. So if you make your stuff behave like an ad, you're never going to get your message across. Providing alternatives. Videos are another good example of that. You want to make sure that you have captions. You want to make sure that you have a transcript. I don't want to watch your video. I just want to know what's in the content. Make sure that there's another way around the rock. The same thing is for things like navigation. You want to make sure that there's another way to get to that page if I cannot handle doing your drop down 3 levels. The good news is that you all, as good developers, are already a long way towards being AA compliant because you're kind and write good code that is compliant. All these things are on your way. So flashing stuff. Anybody still use the blink tag? No. It's deprecated. We don't do that. Don't use content that can cause seizures. Seems like pretty wise advice. Don't cause anybody to have a seizure. There's a reason why the blink tag was deprecated. Don't go through hoops trying to reinvent it. It's annoying. Use valid markup, and that includes no duplicate IDs. One thing that we often get from our QA folks is they're like, we want an ID on this, and an ID on that, and an ID on that, because they want their automated tests to run through the IDs. That can be a problem with things like Drupal, where you're grabbing a piece of content and maybe there's 4 of those on the same page. Now they all have the same ID because QA made me put an ID on it. Now your code's not valid, it's not predictable, it's not going to behave the way that you think it's going to behave. These are all terrible things that you don't want to do. Provide QA with a data attribute and say you can use this for you, and then you will not break your code that way. You want to keep your JavaScript error-free. We all know that IE 11, if it hits JavaScript that's an error, will throw up its hands and say, I cannot do anymore. There is an error in the JavaScript. So we want to avoid that kind of stuff. It is possible to do a lot with JavaScript and still be accessible, but you do need to be aware of it. You do need to test it. So if there's a lot of things where you're taking a div and making it clickable with JavaScript, well, the screen reader is probably not going to know that that is a clickable thing because it's just looking for the things that I know are clickable. I'm looking for A tags and buttons. Unless you force the screen reader to stop on that spot, no one using a screen reader is going to know that you can click here, even if you make it say click here. So here's another thing that those of us who use content management systems are way ahead of the game. Navigation menus are in the same location and order on every web page. Well, of course they are. Who wants to maintain 17 different menus for 17 pages of content? That's crazy. So just all we have to do for that is not break it. Provide error messaging in forms. Error messaging in forms is going to be separating men from the boys as far as A compliance and double A compliance. A compliance says, single A compliance says you have to have error messaging in your forms. Double A compliance says that error messaging in your forms should provide people with hints about how they can fix it. So your error messages are going to have to be a little bit more complete. Instead of just saying the date is required, you're going to want to say the date is required and it needs to be in this format. And that's another reason why you want to avoid those placeholder hints as far as in forms where it disappears as soon as you start typing. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten halfway through a date and realized I don't remember whether I'm supposed to provide 4 digits for the date, for the year, or 2. And you just pick one and hope it's right. Specifying the language of the web page is standard part of the Drupal template. All you have to do is not break it. For most of us, we're usually doing stuff in one language. We won't have to touch that ever. Once you get into multi-language channels, then you'll need to head into that template and make sure that you are providing the right language for that. With screen readers, it can help the screen reader understand how to pronounce things if it knows which language it's in. We used to, remember back in the early days when we had GPSs and they were like a single thing and you like plugged them into your car and it wasn't on your phone and stuff? So we had one of those. It was very dumb. But it had a Swedish language channel. And we're like, oh, let's turn it into Swedish. So it spoke the directions in Swedish, but it had no idea how to pronounce it. So my kids think that turning right is slung till monster, which I'm pretty sure is not what they say in Swedish, but it's funny, so let's leave it. Drupal provides a skip to main content link. This is a lifesaver. I don't know if anybody here has used a screen reader, but screen readers are slow until you can get the hang, especially until you can get the hang of it. If you listen to someone who uses assistive technology habitually, they will have the speed on their screen reader up so high, it's like you're not even at the same baud rate as me. I don't know how you can make language out of that. It's crazy. But that skip to main content link is essential because this is going to give you the opportunity to skip the whole primary nav. Otherwise, you're going to start at the top of the screen and every page with that consistently placed navigation, it's going to go through all of the navigation elements before I can get to what I really want, the H1. And that just slows you down, makes you forget why you even came here to this page in the first place. Don't break the skip to main content. Here's a screenshot of the web aim checker. Every time you get a new design, run its colors through the contrast checker. Now it's very obvious here that light blue on tan is not going to pass. But there are times when it will surprise you. We had a new design that came through and it had a nice poppy bright green and white text on it. Looked great. And I ran it through the color checker because that's part of my process when I'm analyzing designs and doing code reviews and stuff like that. It failed miserably because of the green. And the green kind of pops for me, wouldn't necessarily pop in another context. So we had to sort of muddy the green a bit to make it more dark so that that white would actually make it pass. And you can see that the web aim contrast checker will tell you this passes for AA, this passes for AAA. It explains exactly what mark you need to hit and provides you with a slider if you want to mess with the brightness there and maybe guess if you need to, instead of bouncing it back to design. Correct sequence can be programmatically determined. Semantic markup is your friend. You want to use headings to show hierarchy. You want to keep markup in the same flow as display. The bugaboo on this one is going to be tab content. So if you have tabs where you have the title tabs up at the top and then content is in a whole different place, or content is served via React from the Shadow DOM or something, that's going to be difficult. Screen reader power users. When you use a screen reader, you have some people who are using it because I'm cooking and I don't want to touch my screen. You have other people who are screen reader power users who know all of the shortcuts and tips and tricks and all that, the screen reader hacks that they can use to get through a web page really quickly. One of the ways is you can grab all the headings and jump right to the heading that you want to hit. You can also grab all the links and jump right to the link that you want to hit. So be aware of those shortcut ways that people use. We recently had some code cross our desk that looked like this. What's the problem with that? Anybody?
It's not an actual heading.
It's not an actual heading. It may look like a heading to you and me, but that's not really a heading. If you're doing something like that, have a really good reason about why you're doing that. Is there a reason why you're hiding that as a heading? Is there a reason why it's styled this way but not really a heading? I'm not saying it's terrible to do that. It's terrible to do that. But you'd better have a really good reason. You want to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are. So a page needs a useful title. If every page on your website has "My website" as the title, that's impossible. You can't tell which page you're on. When you bookmark it, you don't know which page you bookmarked because they're all the same. This is something that people kind of lean on sometimes, and it's a terrible practice. We need to make sure that we're providing useful titles that tell people what they're going to get when they get there. You're using tables. Tables are fine for tabular data. Make sure you have all of the pieces of the table. You need the T head. You need that. It'd be great to have that caption up at the top to tell me what this table is all about. You need to have column headers so I know what this data is like. Tables are going to be tough for screen readers, especially for a screen reader novice to navigate, because different screen readers are going to interpret those differently. And it's kind of an acquired skill to figure out what's going on in the table. Forms. The biggest thing that you're going to hit when you're doing a check is that your form doesn't have a label, especially your search form. So that's the thing that it will always kick as your error in your audit when you're auditing for that. So just like I was saying before, forms need error messages. That's single A compliance. Error messages should provide suggestions for valid input. That's double A compliance. So that gives you a sense of how much more you have to do. It's that same sort of paradigm. Help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are. It's great to have that main navigation consistently in the same place all the time. Sometimes it's still impossible to find what you need. Provide a sitemap that people can navigate when they give up on your main navigation because they can't get the drop-down to drop-down properly, or they can't figure out what thing it should be under. Provide them with a sitemap so that they can do a search on their own. If your site has more than a few pages, provide a search functionality so that people can find what they need to find quickly. Images. Managing images is a big part of what we do to become more accessible. One of the things we want to do is let text be text. If you want your text on your image to provide actual meaning, then why are you making it pixels? Go ahead and make it text. It can be hard to read, and unless you write a good alt tag, you're never going to get that message across. If that message is important enough to include it, why not make it so that it can get across? Here we have an imaging text fail. You can see that the words really pop when they're on top of the ginger. Not so much when they're on top of the shadow. It becomes very hard to read. It would be very difficult to pick a color of text that would provide adequate contrast on both of these backgrounds. the alt tag is doing a whole lot of extra heavy lifting. It's describing what's going on in the image, and it also has to say what the text says, which is kind of nuts because on this same page, all this is in the heading. Why did you even need to put it on top of the image? It's a perfectly lovely picture of Ginger. Just let me look at it. Anyway, so that's something that we do want to avoid and to be aware of. Those contrast images, the text can seem like it's a great color for this, but as soon as you put it on the wrong image, nobody's going to be able to read it. Two other things we do with images. Here's a good tool, first of all. When we are putting text on images, when you can't talk design out of it, you can use a tool like brandwood.com A11Y to check out how terrible is your text going to look on this background image. Sometimes, speaking of background images, we often use images that are not images because background can be such a useful tool to make sure that your image is actually going to fill the spot that it needs to fill. So when you do that, you still want to make sure that you're providing the content of what that image is to people who don't really realize it's an image, screen readers. So in that case, what you want to do is provide an ARIA label that has the information that would normally be in an alt tag as part of that div code. So when you are including images, it's important to include descriptive alt tags. A lot of times it's not going to be developers who are writing the alt tags, it's content editors. We need to school our content editors on how to write a good alt tag. The paradigm I like to use is that the alt tag, I should be able to look here at a table full of images and pick out the one that you need by what you described in your alt tag. Give me an alt tag for this picture. Anybody?
Not holding a tree with googly eyes.
There you go. See? And you would find that if I just told you tree, you're not going to get this picture. You're going to get a picture of a Christmas tree, or you're going to get a picture of a maple tree. And you're not going to get the semantic value of what message this image is trying to convey unless you can describe it adequately. What is this image on the page for? What it is trying to communicate? What are we doing in it? Who's in it? What are they doing? You want to be able to identify that image for someone who's not looking at it. Yes?
If it were a photograph, do you recommend using the person's name if they're going to be ID'd?
That can be a privacy issue. So that would be something that if it is a person who is like a recognizable person, then absolutely say that this is a picture of George Clooney. But if it's somebody like who you work with, you'd absolutely need to get their permission to say who they are. And other than that, you would probably just describe what's going on in the picture, like man washing his hands at a sink, something like that, instead of George washing his hands at a sink.
So even if it's like a staff contact list,
if it's a
permission?
I would, because some people can forget that they need to hide from some people, and once it's out there, it's out there. So it's absolutely something. Like I do a website for a daycare site, and they have a very thorough photograph release form that the parents say that this is okay to use a picture of my kid on the site. We never say the kids' names or anything, but just the image can be trouble for some families. So you don't want to borrow trouble. We don't always need to provide an alt tag. There are some times when it's fine to skip it. If you have a captioned image, like this one, where right with the image is the explanation of what it is, then you can skip the alt tag. If you have a strictly decorative image, I really don't need to know that this is a blue thing that looks kind of like the ocean. It's light on the top, dark on the bottom. I could describe the bejesus out of that, but you don't really need to know. In a case like this, Drupal 8 is still going to say, thou must have an alt tag. It will not let you save that piece of content unless you provide an alt tag. In those cases, feel free to make those alt tags as minimal as possible. You probably can't get away with just a space or something like that, but just make sure that they are as succinct as possible. Link text is descriptive. Remember when we talked a little bit about screen reader power users? This is the list of links on a new content page that marketing wanted us to put out. And I said, wait a minute, we have a problem. And they had no idea that someone could look at just the clickable text, a list of all the clickable text on the page. This is why these links that read click here, read more, those are really not useful because there are usually multiple ones on a page. There are often, how do I know which one's the article I want to read? Is it this one or is it this one? I have to count? No, this is not a good thing. So make sure that you are providing information in your clickable text that explains to the person, this is going back to being predictable. I should know when I click that, what am I going to get? If I click register, I think I'm probably going to get a registration form. If I click learn more, I don't know what I'm going to get. So make sure you're providing context cues. Giving the user control. Let the user interactions determine when things start and stop. So that means all those marketing people who want to put automatically playing slideshows on their side, you now have backup to say, no, do not do this. This is a law, you can't. So this is a good thing. We also want to provide warnings prior to automatic timeouts and logoffs. You want that interaction to be predictable and in the hand of the user. These are things that you don't see very often. Foreign language phrases, when you're in the middle of English content and you throw in something that's in a foreign language, you want to tag that with the foreign language used so that the screen reader can understand, oh, this is going to be Spanish now, I need to say this in a different way. Because most of them can handle that. I wouldn't do it if it were just like a little thing. You don't have to tag taco. But if it's an extended piece of foreign language content, please tag the foreign language you're using. If you are doing live video, most of us don't do live video. We're just slapping up videos that have already been done. So we have an opportunity to do transcripts and captions and fix it in post. When you are doing live video for AA compliance, you need to provide live captions just like the news. And that can be an extra expense that people haven't anticipated in their budget. Providing alternatives. You need to provide alternatives for video content. You'll need to provide captions, including descriptions if you're doing AA compliance. What that means is the regular old captions are going to capture all of the dialogue. The descriptive captions are going to capture those non-dialogue pieces that also provide an understanding of what the scene is about. So if you're, I don't know if you've ever watched TV with the captions on, when they're talking to each other and you get all the captions and then over here you say sad song plays. That's what they're talking about when they say descriptive captions. You want to give the user control, so make sure that those controls are always present in a way that people expect, and try not to break them from the ways that people are used to interacting with them. If I'm on YouTube, pressing my spacebar means pause. Don't make the spacebar do something else or do nothing by what you have chosen, how you have chosen to implement that video. We do not want to rely on sensory characteristics of components such as shape, size, visual location, orientation, or sound. And color should never be the only visual means of conveying information. If you have ever filled out a form and messed up and skipped a field, and then had to go back and find it, and the only thing different is that the color of the border around the input changed. It's detective work. You do not want to make people who are just trying to provide you the information you want in the form, just trying to buy something, just trying to apply for something, and you want them to go on a seek and find. It's not a great look for you. We want to make sure that we're reinforcing those things. So if it's going to turn red, make sure it turns red and also has a message and also has maybe an icon. We want to make sure that everybody's working together as a team. Why alternatives are important. This is a date picker. Date pickers and drag and drop interfaces are the things that are not necessarily solved problems in accessibility issues. They have a high tendency to be completely unusable to people who are using assistive technologies. If you look here, this is the date picker from Kayak. Very visually pops real good, nice contrast. It's absolutely apparent that Friday, May 10th is a Friday and it's in May and everything is cool. This is the code that it uses. This is what the screen reader would have to read and parse for you to tell you which thing you're on as you're tabbing through the month. The only thing that saves this 10 and puts it in context is there's an ARIA label here that says May 10th. Make sure that you have those ARIA labels, that you have that extra level of accommodation when you're doing with something with a high JavaScript element or a high mouse element, like a date picker, like a drag and drop interface, like things like that. So how to check? Absolutely the best way to check and see if your stuff is compliant is to hire someone who is an experienced user of assistive technology on a habitual basis to come and check all of the things. And you will go to your boss and they will say, great, you have $0. And you will have to do it yourself. One of the first things that you're going to want to do is get out your keyboard navigation. All you have to do is position your cursor at the end of the URL window in the browser and tab away. You want to be able to see where you are. This is a focus outline. Marketing hates them. They think they are unsightly. If you do not have them, you need to make sure you have no idea which one you're on the page. You would have to count and say, all right, I've tabbed 7 times. No, wait, 8. So I must be on this one. Let's try it. Surprise is not a thing that we really enjoy a lot when surfing the web, and neither do people who use assistive technologies. Make sure they know where they are. The other thing is to make sure that you can navigate to everything that you think is clickable on the page. When you have things that are clickable because they're divs that JavaScript put a paint over and said, now I'm clickable, it may not trigger your screen reader to stop on that spot, and you will never get to that clickable link. You will never capture that traffic. This is what Voiceover kind of looks like when you use it. You want to write down how to turn it off. Find your headphones, borrow the iPad, turn Voiceover on, navigate to a page. It will start up at the top. When it gets to about here, it'll say skip to main content. And you will see that pop out on the page. It will immediately become visible. It's usually hidden. And if you click then it will bump you down to here. Otherwise, it's going to go through all of this navigation before you get to the H1 here. And then it's going to read this, and the black line will be around each element as you go. It's a great way to see if your page content can be programmatically determined. If Voiceover is going through your page and it goes through just like that, you're in like Flynn, you're doing good. If it starts here and then it ends up over here and then it's back over here and then it's over there, you've got a problem with how your content is laid out on the code level. and you need to figure out how you're going to move your markup around to make that experience more logical for people using screen readers. Because, you can do anything with CSS. You want this over here? Sure, no problem. But especially if you're using VoiceOver and looking at it, it can be a very confusing experience. Additional screen readers, NVDA is another very common one. It is free. It is a little bit more advanced than, a little bit harder to configure than VoiceOver. VoiceOver, you just have to turn on and walk through it. NVDA is has a little bit more configuration to do, but it is also free. The good news is that compliance is hand in hand with valid code. If you are writing good code, if you are writing valid code, if you are writing things that pass through validators, you're probably most of the way there. So that seems like a lot. What do you actually have to do? First, your mission, should you choose to accept it, and I hope you do, is to be aware, check it yourself, and be vigilant. So you want to be aware of accessibility issues. Before you go today, pick up a handout. I have put together a checklist that we're using in our organization. You can walk through all of the different marks that you're supposed to hit. I was looking at that and I'm like, well, if we walk through this one and then we walk through that one and we walk through that one, I'm looking at the page 5 times. So this should kind of keep things in a sort of order so that you're looking at a single element a single time. So I'm going to leave these over here and grab one as you go out. The Google Doc that this is from is available at this short link and at that QR code. You want to check. Use an accessibility checker. They're freely available. One that I use is the Axe Toolbar Chrome extension. You just get it from the Chrome web store. It's called Axe, and then it shows up in your web inspector. You have to inspect the page, and then you analyze it. Google Lighthouse also provides a bunch of audits out of the box. It's under the Audits tab. We all know, like, the inspector, like, we use this one, and maybe that one. The rest of the stuff is a mystery. I don't know what that is. But the Audits tab has a number of different audits on it, not just accessibility. There's accessibility, there's performance, there's mobile. There's a bunch of different things that you can run your page through to see how you're doing. And I strongly recommend you get comfortable with that. So what Axe does when it goes through your page, it's going to run through your code, and it's going to come up with what your violations are and what needs review. And this is the sort of output you're going to get for that. It's going to tell you exactly what is the problem. I told you, search doesn't have a label. Every time they want just that little magnifying glass, and they don't want to have a label. And there's a lot of times when you're going to run into things that you cannot fix. We have an add this toolbar, and that has JavaScript errors. You get stuck in it as you go through keyboard navigation. You end up in the end of this little modal window, and it will not let you out. There's no way to skip back to the page. It's terrible, but we still have it, and it's going away soon. I'm so happy. So you may end up with things like that you cannot fix because the thing that is there is injected by somebody else. The best you can do is file a support ticket with them and say, hey, you need to make your stuff accessible. Or I'm taking my dump truck full of money and I'm going home. This is what Google Lighthouse looks like. You can see that there's a number of different audits that you can do: SEO, best practice, progressive web app, performance, and accessibility. And it will give you feedback here. As you can see, there are additional items to manually check. There are things that it will not know, that it cannot know, and that only you know. If one of those things is, does the page present the content in a logical order. They don't know. They know what they got from the code. They don't know if the code matches what you get from the visuals. You're going to have to go and take a look at that yourself. The other thing you want to do is be vigilant. Make it part of your process to keep accessibility in mind. We have created, we're an agile team. We have created a punch part of our definition of done. It's not done until it's passed accessibility checks. It cannot go to production until it's passed these checks. And that is a way of us keeping that as part of our process all the time so that we make sure that we're never forgetting about it. This is a picture of the Shake Shack out in King of Prussia. You get to the Shake Shack by going up the steps and then in the door over here. There's a ramp, so you don't have to worry about that. So you can come up the ramp and then go around that way across the patio when you get to the door. The other day we were there for lunch and they had market umbrellas on the terrace there. Looks very charming and inviting. Let's go outside and have a little picnic and eat our Shake Shack on the porch. It's lovely. One of those market umbrellas was right here, right at the very top of the ramp. Now that was not because the guy who was setting up the marketing umbrellas was like, ha ha, no wheelchair people in here today. No, he just wasn't thinking about it. It wasn't the top of his mind. It slipped his mind, and he was just trying to get those market umbrellas to look charming and inviting. And I'm like, oh God, that is not okay. You cannot have that there. And so we went back inside and said, you got to move that market umbrella. So takeaway from that is you don't have to be mean. You just have to have it slip your mind. You need to be vigilant all the time. And if you see something that somebody else has done that has a problem, be empowered to speak up. Because you have this at your back. These are the reasons why you need to do this. They're important reasons. You're not trying to say, haha, you're dumb, you have made bad code. You're saying we have a problem here and we need to fix it. And always feel empowered to do that and speak up. Here again is a resources page. I'll leave that up there for a while if anybody needs it. On the subject of speaking up, does anybody have any questions?
The slides that are on the website are not up to date with what you have here. Will that be updated?
Yes. I think I updated them yesterday afternoon.
Because I don't see this page in there.
That's entirely possible. I think I did that yesterday afternoon. So.
I'm not a developer. I'm kind of landing in this in a roundabout way. I'm a communications person who's going to wind up doing the website.
So say we all.
Yeah, if you have recommendations, we're just kind of starting over. Do you have recommendations for somebody who's willing to read to it to kind of get through this process without making huge mistakes? I mean, the developer that we're going to be working with is familiar with accessibility, but as a person checking that, I mean, I've got all these tools, but is there anything, I mean, some of this was obviously in my
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you're going to want to do is make sure that you're not asking for things that are going to mix up. You know, so don't ask for things that are gonna blink or autoplay. Don't make them say, no, I can't give you that. The other thing is to run it through an audit, an accessibility audit like that. That's going to pop those things up. The good news is for all of us is that a lot of this stuff is just writing good code. A lot of this stuff is kind of handled for you by Drupal. All you have to do is avoid breaking it. So don't be intimidated by it, and just keep it as part of what you're looking for. The other thing to do is that when you're working with a designer, when you're working with a designer or a developer, you put it out there and say, this is the level I want to meet. I want this to be compliant at this level. I need to do that. And you build that into, just like that customer came to us and said, we cannot use you unless. Build that as part of your statement of work, that this output shall be. and do that. Anybody else?
Have you used the user web widget at all on old sites?
No, I have not.
It's just a JavaScript that rides on top of the site. It's pretty good for sites that don't meet guidelines. It gives some tools for the user. But I was just wondering if you had experience with
No, I don't have experience with that.
We've done it on some support clients where they don't have the money to redevelop their site.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing is that this is so much easier to do on the way in while you're developing new features, and really kind of a pain to go back and repaint and fix. So if you can pull it in as early in the process as possible is great. Yes?
And what do you do with PDFs?
The question is, what do you do with PDFs? Try to avoid them,
Right, well,
which you can't.
And the best tool we found is just the Adobe Acrobat Pro as accessibility checker, but I was just wondering if there's any place that lists a standard for AAA compliance.
I mean, I would. I have not used Adobe's accessibility checker on PDFs. I would recommend just, I would need to do more research on that.
Okay.
But the same rules would apply as far as you're chunking your content and,
Exactly.
and making your contrast proper, as you would with other web pages. Although you're just dealing with PDFs, and make text be text, because there are ways to create PDFs where everything's pixels.
Yes.
You can't select anything, and it's really a pain. And I would suggest let text be text is the biggest thing you want to do.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you like Wave, web accessibility tool?
I do. I have used that. I find that it gets a little pushy sometimes. Once you turn it on and it's like, guess what, this is a problem. I'm like, I know, I'm not doing that right now. So the extension tools can be a little bit easier because they'll stay out of your way while you're doing stuff a little bit more. And when you're like in process. And we're working on getting our automated testing to incorporate those accessibility checks as well. That is coming soon to a developer near me. Any other questions? In the back.
So developers tend to be kind of the last line of defense in identifying a lot of this stuff. How has your experience been working with designers, content editors, as you kind of explain to them that this doesn't meet accessibility standards? Do you feel like they're starting to understand, pick it up, make changes in your design patterns, things like that?
The question is how, as a developer, I'm kind of the last line of defense before things go to press. And so I've often found myself in the position of pushing back on marketers and designers who want things that are just not okay. And what I've found is that designers and marketers like us are trainable. And the more you work with them and the more you keep bringing up these same issues, the more likely the next design that you will get is not going to break the same rules. The other thing is that it is really nice to have the accessibility standards at your back, because you're not saying your design is terrible and you're terrible. You're saying this doesn't pass this particular test that we have to pass. Please fix it so it does pass this test. It kind of takes the personality out of it, and that way you have a little bit better options for getting your message across without somebody shutting down. Any other questions?
What's an example of something for AAA compliance that you would need to do?
Gosh, we don't need to meet it, so I don't know it as well. But for instance, the contrast checker, the contrast needs to be much higher. So what you saw in the contrast checker, where there's an AA level fail and a AAA fail, the contrast for the AAA needs to be even more so. So if you're planning on using dark blue text on a light blue background, don't. So it does kind of constrain you as far as the colors that you can use and things like that.
When you mentioned about being sued and lawsuits and those type of things, are you talking about when you're contracted to do a site that's accessible, or are you just saying that any user could?
Any user who can't use your site, if your site is supposed to be publicly available, it needs to be ADA compliant, which it's like if you opened a store and your store had steps to it, somebody could sue you and say, I can't get into your store, it's supposed to be public and I can't go there. It's a problem. And you do get that. Companies do get sued. Target got sued because they did a huge redesign and it wasn't accessible and they had to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I was just going to also mention, I think it was Beyonce. I think someone just went after her for accessibility. I think her site was not accessible. She had
Beyonce? Queen Bee needs to be accessible too. She's a resource for all of us. But yeah, people are out there. People get lawyers and go after people, and you can often tell the universities that have had people sue them because they have a great big accessibility section on their website as part of their settlement. All right, looks like that's our time about. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my talk, my name again is Gretchen Grant. I am available online via email and on LinkedIn. Sorry, I'm not on Twitter. Twitter's just another way to spell you're going to be in trouble soon. If you did not like my talk, my name is Carol Danvers.